Hey, what's up, guys? It's Nikki, and you are listening to Evolution by Nikki, the podcast. In today's episode, I'm going to break down exactly what transpired in the 1.5 years between when Justin and I started dating and when we moved to Tempe, Arizona. So in episode 12, I had left off with Justin and I were at Danico in Little Italy celebrating Valentine's Day. And at the end of the dinner, Justin formally and romantically asked me out officially, literally saying, "Would you be my girlfriend?" But I was still legally married. However, naturally, I said yes to being his girlfriend. I figured I would deal with the logistics when we got home and we could talk. The entire night had been perfect. We went to the Met, we walked around Central Park, ate in Little Italy, and I really didn't want to ruin that entire night by dropping a huge bomb on him while we were still out trying to have a good time. Once we got home, I told him that we needed to get in the car again and go somewhere. I grabbed my keys and asked him to come, and he obliged. I drove about 2 or 3 miles down 35 to the Homedale Commons parking lot. I picked a random space as far away from other cars and people as possible, and once I put the car into park, I just started bawling my eyes out. Justin was visibly concerned, and he was trying to comfort me, and he didn't even know what was going on or why I was crying because I hadn't even said anything yet. When I finally did catch my breath, I basically just said, "I have to tell you something that may change the way you feel about me and may change you wanting to pursue a relationship with me." He looked at me so confused. It's then that I just blurted it out. I just literally was like, "I'm married to my ex." And the moment those words came out of my mouth, my heart dropped. My heart was in my stomach, and I had a lump in my throat, and neither one would go away. What happened next is something I'll never forget. He looked into my eyes, held my hands, and said, "Why would that ever change my feelings for you?" I let out the biggest, most audible sigh of relief. You literally heard me sighing. We sat in that parking spot forever. I told him everything from the beginning. About my mom. About my ex. Every single thing about my relationship with my ex. And what that relation did to me as a woman, as a human being. All Justin could do was assure me that he is not that kind of guy. At this point, I was done crying. We had talked about it all. We said everything that needed to be said. So, we headed home. Shortly after his first trip to Jersey on Valentine's Day, I booked a flight to come see him in North Carolina. At this time, he was still stationed in Camp Lejeune. So I decided to surprise him by flying down to Raleigh as a surprise for his friend Michael's birthday. So I coordinated everything. He knew nothing. And I was on the plane coming to Raleigh. And all of a sudden, his friend Michael, who was supposed to pick me up for the surprise, got called back in to work. He got called back into duty. So Michael wound up having to tell Justin about the whole surprise, ruin the whole damn thing, And he wound up picking me up from the airport that I was supposed to be surprising him at. But basically the whole point of that story is, it was me and about 5 other Marines and only one other girl. And that weekend was one of the best weekends of my life. I learned so much about myself, about what I deserve, about how a woman is supposed to be treated. We went to countless bars and restaurants, and I never paid for a thing. When I was out with these guys, it was literally like being treated like royalty. I'm serious, like not even joking. They were some of the most generous people, generous men I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. And I can't tell you how many times I was called princess that weekend. And not even in a sarcastic way, in an endearing way. Following that trip, I made several more down to Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, in order to spend as much time as possible with Justin, which happened to only be physically seeing him in person 1 weekend a month, sometimes only 1 weekend every other month. However, having a long-distance relationship was exactly what I needed. I had lived with my ex for about a year prior to meeting Justin, and I was used to having my partner with me day in and day out. But my relationship with Justin was vastly different. So our relationship evolved without so much of a physical connection. Ours was more of a soulful, intimate, emotion-based connection because we didn't have the opportunity to be physically present with each other all the time. So we had to build those other relationship skills together before even getting the opportunity to be physical or to develop a physical attraction. We were thousands of miles away from each other at times. Anyway, my friend Melanie and I took countless trips to meet up with Justin and his different Marine Corps buddies down in Lejeune. We drove to Virginia Beach to see the Dave Matthews Band concert. We drove down to North Carolina on several occasions to go to Camp Lejeune and to Wilmington. And then we drove to South Carolina to go to Myrtle Beach. And I had never jet-setted like this in my life. Like, I've been on planes my whole life. Florida, the Bahamas, Spain, Portugal. But that was like every few years that was happening. And when I met Justin, all of a sudden I was jet-setting every month, going here, going there, meeting them here, meeting them there. But that summer, doing that was one of the greatest summers of my life, and I wouldn't change a thing about it, even though we weren't physically together all the time. I think our relationship is as strong as it is because we have the foundational relationship skills, and our relationship wasn't based on sexual or physical attraction from the beginning. That came after we started talking to one another, after we developed a friendship, after we got to know each other. So I can sit here and tell story after story of everything that we did together that year, but I do want to get to one more thing. So obviously, I'm still married at this point. So what do? Well, I couldn't ask for help because no one knew what I had done. No one knew I was married. Literally no one, except my ex's immediate family and now Justin. So I did what women do best. I became a private investigator. So basically what I mean is I started Googling and researching divorces, divorce lawyers, mediation. I was so paranoid at this point to talk to anyone or reach out to anyone because I was really deathly afraid that I would wind up speaking to a lawyer who knew my family, who knew my last name. And although there's attorney-client privilege, I don't know. I don't know if someone would say, hey, your daughter's getting a divorce. She came to me the other day. I didn't need that. So I chose a lawyer located in Harborside Financial Center in Jersey City, which was about 45 minutes away from my parents' house at least. To me, that was the safest bet because I wanted to stay far away just in case the lawyer had connections to my family in Hazlitt. So I showed up at the law office of Marina Dementman one day after work and broke down in tears in her conference room. She gave me my own box of tissues. When I finished the story, she looked at me and said, "Don't worry, I'm going to make this right." And again, I let out an audible sigh of relief. She said that since we had an uncontested divorce and no children or assets together, it would be very easy. Naturally, next, I asked, well, how much is this going to cost? When she said $5,000, I nearly fell off the chair. At this time, mind you, I'm a full-time college student. I don't have $5,000, and I couldn't ask anybody to help me, could I? So how was I going to afford that? It was then that I got a job at a local Nissan dealership in the business development office. I worked there for about 6 months before I saved enough money to pay for half of the divorce. I did call my ex at this point to tell him about the cost and to tell him that he now owes me $2,500. So luckily, he was just as over this whole relationship as I was. He didn't care from the beginning that we had separated. It didn't bother him at all. I was the only one that was initially upset or, torn about it. But he was over it. I was over it. So we wanted it to go away. So one night after work, I left the Nissan dealership. It was about 10 o'clock. And I drove in the pouring rain, which is one of my biggest fears, if anyone knows me, is I do not like driving in the dark and I do not like driving in the rain. But I drove in the pouring rain to Cheesequake Rest Stop, which is about 10 minutes down the parkway from me. I drove there to meet him. And when he pulled up to me, he got out of his car and basically threw $2,500 at me through the window and drove off. I took the $25,000, obviously, and drove off smiling because I knew I never needed to deal with him again. It was finally over. And actually, I haven't seen him since that night at the rest stop. And that was in 2009, 2010. And it's 2022? I haven't seen him in all those years. However, I thought it was over, but it wasn't. Because I lived in constant fear of someone finding out my deepest, darkest secret and exposing me to my family. I knew how much of a disappointment I would be. So I kept my mouth shut and I lived in this paranoid state until just this year when I posted episodes 8 and 9 in February and told the world what I had done and what I had went through. No one knew other than my husband and a few select friends until that point. Before I end the episode, I want to add something. Marina Dementman, the lawyer, told me that I did have the option of reporting him to immigration for marrying me under false pretenses in order to get his citizenship. If I reported him, his visas, anything associated with his citizenship would be immediately revoked. As much as I hated him and I wanted him to suffer at that point, I could not bring myself to take that citizenship opportunity away. In my mind, I said to myself, you didn't go through all of this and sacrifice yourself for nothing. So, I allowed him to continue on with the immigration hearing, which happens in Newark. However, I refused to physically be a part of it any longer. I told him that I would not show up at another hearing or attend another meeting as his wife. I told him he could explain to the immigration officer and whomever else wants to know why I refuse to go to the meetings, why I refuse to show up at the hearings, and they can determine if you are still eligible for citizenship. And I never went to another hearing. I honestly don't know what happened. I don't know if he forged my signature. I don't know if he paid somebody to pretend to be me and show up at the immigration hearings. Like, I have no idea. I never asked, and I really stopped caring. But there is so much left of this part of the story yet to be told. And next, in episode 2, we will discuss my relationship with Justin as it evolved through the end of college and how it resulted in us deciding to both up and leave the East Coast and travel across the country to Tempe, Arizona. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. I would like to also extend a huge thank you to my in-person supporters who have been coming to events, reaching out, sharing my posts, and just overall being super supportive. I appreciate it more than you will ever know. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you next time.